You did not cry because you were weak. You cried because your spirit was carrying weight that would have crushed a lesser version of you. And yet you kept walking, kept breathing, kept showing up in rooms where your soul felt tired and your heart felt bruised. That is what so many people never understood about you. They saw the tears, but they did not see the restraint it took not to become bitter. They saw the silence, but they did not hear the prayers trembling underneath it. They saw the moments you broke down, but they could not see heaven rebuilding you in the same hour. Chosen one, every tear you shed carried a message. Every heartbreak held heat, and every night of silent suffering was doing more than hurting you. It was shaping you for a higher level of strength, purpose, and spiritual authority. What felt like emotional collapse was often spiritual construction. What looked like weakness in the eyes of people was often proof that your heart was still alive, still pure, still capable of feeling deeply in a world that rewards numbness. So before we go deeper, take a moment to receive this truth fully. Your tears were never empty, and your pain was never pointless. If this message is speaking directly to your spirit, subscribe, like this video, and comment. My tears had purpose below because you are not here by accident. You are here because something inside you is ready to understand that the very thing you thought made you fragile may be the same thing God used to make you powerful. And that realization changes everything. Because once you stop being ashamed of what you survived, you begin to see that your story was never about breaking apart, it was always about becoming. And as you begin to remember the tears nobody understood, you must also remember the hidden battles that produced them, because there were seasons when you cried in silence with no audience, no applause, and no explanation. Only the raw ache of carrying pain that you could not easily translate into words. There were nights when your chest felt heavy for reasons even you struggled to name, when the world expected a smile, but your soul was fighting just to remain steady. Some of your deepest tears were born in private places, in moments where nobody could validate what you were enduring, and that made the burden feel even heavier. It is one thing to suffer openly and receive comfort. It is another thing to suffer invisibly and still find the strength to continue. That is what made your tears sacred. They were not evidence that you were failing. They were evidence that you were still fighting while feeling everything at full depth. Many people confuse tears with surrender, but your tears were not surrender. They were release. They were the overflow of a soul trying to remain soft in situations designed to harden it. They were what happened when your spirit refused to become cruel, even after betrayal refused to become cold, even after rejection refused to stop hoping, even after disappointment. Heaven never mocked those tears. Heaven recognized them as endurance. Every tear said, I am hurt, but I am still here. I am tired, but I am still standing. I do not understand what this season is doing to me, but I have not given up. And there is a kind of spiritual dignity in that which this world rarely knows how to honor. The world tends to celebrate loud strength, visible achievement, and polished confidence, but heaven pays attention to quieter victories, the moments when you choose not to quit, not to curse your life, not to become what hurt you. Those private tears became witnesses. They testified that your heart was under pressure and still remained alive. They proved that even when life felt unbearable, you kept going. That matters more than you know, because your survival was not only physical, it was moral, emotional, and spiritual. You survived with your sensitivity intact. You survived with your ability to love still breathing underneath the pain. You survived without completely losing your faith in meaning, and that is no small thing. That is why those misunderstood tears were not the end of your strength, but the first evidence of it. Because once you understand that your tears were signs of endurance, you can begin to see that the seasons that produced them were not random punishments, but training grounds disguised as hardship. There were chapters of your life that felt unfair, even cruel, And in those moments, it was easy to believe that you were being singled out for pain. Betrayal came from people you trusted. Distance came from people who once felt close. Loss arrived without permission. Confusion blurred your sense of direction. Emotional exhaustion drained your joy until even simple things felt heavy. But what if those seasons were not only taking from you? What if they were also building something inside you that comfort never could? The hardest truth to accept is that some forms of strength cannot be developed in ease. Discernment is usually born after disappointment. Boundaries are often built after betrayal. Depth is formed in sorrow. Wisdom grows where certainty once died. You were not being abandoned in those seasons as much as you were being prepared. Every painful encounter was revealing something. It revealed where you were overextending yourself. It revealed who could not go with you. It revealed the parts of you that still depended too much on approval, external clarity, or familiar patterns. It revealed what needed healing and what needed pruning. And while the process felt brutal, it was also precise. Pain became a kind of classroom, not the classroom you would have chosen, but one that taught with unforgettable clarity. In that training ground, you learned how to sit with yourself when no one came to rescue you. You learned how to hear your own soul beneath the noise of expectations. You learned that not every closed door was rejection, and not every delay was denial. You learned how to endure discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. That is spiritual conditioning. It is not glamorous. It does not look impressive while it is happening. It often feels like confusion, grief, and waiting. But beneath the surface, your inner world was developing muscle. Resilience was being forged. Wisdom was sharpening. Discernment was waking up. You began to recognize patterns faster. You started to sense when energy was off before evidence appeared. You became slower to trust empty words and quicker to notice what actions revealed. That did not happen because life was easy on you. It happened because the fire trained your sight. And one of the deepest lessons hidden in painful seasons is this: preparation often feels like loss while it is happening. You think something precious is being taken when, in truth, something essential is being made. The old version of you could not carry the next level of your assignment. It was too attached, too uncertain, too vulnerable to illusions. So life began stripping not to humiliate you, but to strengthen your foundation. The emotional exhaustion you hated taught you where you were pouring from an empty place. The betrayals you cried over taught you not to confuse proximity with loyalty. The confusion you feared taught you to seek deeper truth instead of easy answers. Nothing was wasted. Even the pain had instruction in it. Even the heartbreak had training in it. Even the loneliness had wisdom hidden in its echo. And as all of that training continued, something remarkable began to happen, because sorrow can only remain sorrow for so long in a person who is truly chosen. Eventually, the tears that once fell like evidence of pain begin to change temperature, and what was once grief starts turning into fire. There comes a moment in every chosen one's journey when you realize you are no longer crying from the same place. You are not crying because you are helpless anymore. You are crying because you can feel transformation happening. The ache begins to gather direction. The heartbreak begins to produce focus. The disappointment begins to clear out distractions. The same pain that once drained you starts feeding your discipline. You stop explaining yourself so much. You stop chasing people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering your energy to places that only consume it. And all that emotional energy you once spent trying to be accepted begins flowing back toward your purpose. That is when tears become fuel. They no longer only express what wounded you, they begin powering what is awakening in you. Pain becomes concentration, sorrow becomes vision, grief becomes grit. The fire does not erase the wound overnight, but it changes how the wound functions. Instead of being only a site of weakness, it becomes a source of wisdom. Instead of pulling you backward, it starts pushing you forward. You become more intentional, more discerning, more serious about your path. What once broke your rhythm begins creating it. You become less impressed by noise and more committed to alignment. The chosen one does not remain permanently shattered, because buried inside real pain is often a force that refuses to die. Once activated, it begins rebuilding life from the inside out. Your tears watered the ground where your next self was growing. Every lonely night fed your depth. Every betrayal sharpened your sight. Every disappointment trained your focus. The fire rising in you now is not random ambition. It is refined energy. It is pain that has been converted into purpose. It is emotion that has been disciplined into movement. That is why people may suddenly sense a different presence around you. It is because you are no longer carrying the same helpless frequency. You still feel deeply, but now your depth has direction. You still care, but now your compassion walks beside discernment. You still remember the pain, but now the memory does not rule you, it instructs you. This is what makes a chosen one powerful. Not the absence of sorrow, but the alchemy of it. Not a life untouched by pain, but a soul that learns how to turn pain into momentum. And once your tears become fire, you begin to understand something even more important, that the world often misread your sensitivity from the very beginning. People often underestimate those who feel deeply because this world has confused hardness with strength and numbness with maturity. But your emotional depth was never your flaw. It was one of your greatest gifts. The reason you felt things so intensely was not because you were too weak for this world. It was because your spirit was built to perceive what others overlook. Sensitive people notice shifts in tone, hidden tension, quiet sorrow, false energy, and unspoken truth. They feel atmospheres. They catch fractures in words. They sense what is happening beneath surfaces. That kind of depth can make life more painful, yes, but it also makes life more meaningful. It develops compassion because you know what hurt feels like. It develops intuition because you have spent time listening beneath appearances. It develops spiritual insight because your heart has been trained to recognize truth not only through logic but through resonance. The world may have mocked your tears, called you dramatic, told you to toughen up, or treated your tenderness like a liability. But what they were really seeing was capacity. A deeper emotional range means a deeper ability to love, discern, create, and connect. Your sensitivity allowed you to read rooms others misjudged. It allowed you to see pain in people who are hiding behind smiles. It allowed you to feel when something was off before facts confirmed it. That is not weakness. That is perception. The problem was never that you felt too much. The problem was that you were often surrounded by people who felt too little to understand the value of your depth. And because they could not honor it, they misnamed it. They called it fragility when it was actually awareness. They called it softness when it was actually intelligence of the soul. They called it overreaction when it was often accurate perception arriving before visible proof. Chosen one, you were not designed to be emotionally dead. You were designed to be spiritually alive. Your sensitivity was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to guide you, refine you, and keep you connected to what is real. Yes, it made the betrayal sting more. Yes, it made the loneliness feel sharper. Yes, it made the tears fall easier. But it also made your compassion richer, your intuition stronger, and your connection to the truth more profound. Once you stop apologizing for that, everything starts changing. You stop trying to become smaller, colder, or more numb just to fit into spaces that cannot honor your depth. You begin to understand that your emotional nature is not an obstacle to your calling. It is part of how you carry it. Because a chosen one is not powerful by becoming less human. A chosen one becomes powerful by allowing pain to refine their humanity into wisdom, compassion, discernment, and fire. And that is why your tears were never weakness. They were fuel all along. And this is where your journey reveals one of its deepest mysteries, because every time you thought you were falling apart, something sacred was actually being reconstructed beneath the surface. Something quieter than emotion, yet stronger than panic. Something wiser than the version of you that first entered the storm. There were moments when your inner world felt like a house, with the lights blown out, when your thoughts were scattered. Your heart was tired and your identity seemed to tremble under the pressure of too much disappointment, too much waiting, too much carrying what no one else could see. In those moments, it was easy to believe that you were losing yourself. It was easy to believe that the tears meant collapse, that the exhaustion meant weakness, that the emotional breakdown meant you had finally reached the edge of what you could survive. But the truth is more profound than that. What felt like destruction was often renovation. What felt like collapse was often exposure. The breakdown was not only revealing your pain, it was revealing what could no longer remain inside you if you were going to become who you were called to be. Illusions had to crack. False attachments had to loosen. Pride had to be humbled. Fear had to be brought into the light. Emotional dependence had to be confronted. There were pieces of your old self that could only leave through tears, because tears are not only an expression of pain, they are also a form of cleansing. They carry away what the soul can no longer hold. They wash the dust off truths that were buried under denial. They soften the ground so something stronger can take root. That is why so many of your lowest moments were followed by a strange kind of clarity. Not immediate relief, not instant joy, but clarity. You started seeing people differently. You started noticing where you had been shrinking yourself to preserve connections that were never built to carry your full weight. You started recognizing where fear had been making decisions for you. You started seeing where you had tied your peace to things that were too fragile to hold it. That is growth, even when it arrives wearing the clothes of grief. The chosen one often does not upgrade through applause. You upgrade through rupture. You upgrade through the painful shedding of identities that no longer fit. You upgrade when your soul becomes too honest to keep pretending that crumbs are enough, that confusion is normal, that constant draining is love, that chronic diminishment is humility. Every breakdown carried a hidden upgrade, because every breakdown forced a confrontation between who you had been and who you were becoming. And who you were becoming could no longer survive on illusions. So the old internal architecture had to come down. The version of you that over-explained, overgave, over-trusted, overweighted, over-carried that version had to be interrupted. Not because it was unworthy, but because it was unequipped for the next level of your path. You thought you were being ruined, but you were being refined. You thought you were being emptied, but you were being made spacious. You thought you were breaking, but you were actually opening. And once enough of those hidden upgrades have taken place, something changes in your presence so deeply that the battle itself begins to leave marks not of weakness but of authority. And this is why what you survived has made you dangerous in a way people did not expect. Not dangerous because you became cruel, not dangerous because you became obsessed with revenge, not dangerous because you learned how to dominate. No, your danger is of a different order. You became dangerous because pain sharpened what comfort could never sharpen. You became dangerous because survival taught you how to see through masks. You became dangerous because once a soul has walked through fire without losing its center, it carries a steadiness that unsettles everything false around it. Anyone can talk about strength when life is kind. Anyone can post wisdom when nothing is being tested. Anyone can sound powerful when they have never had to rebuild themselves in private. But you earned your depth. You earned your discernment. You earned your quiet authority through nights that asked more of you than words can fully explain. Your tears taught you where your thresholds were, and then taught you that even your thresholds could move. Your suffering trained you not to panic at pressure. Your heartbreak trained you not to worship appearances. Your loneliness trained you to develop roots in places other people never think to look. And now there is something in your spirit that does not tremble the way it used to. You do not react to everything. You do not chase every misunderstanding. You do not need to prove yourself to every voice that doubts you. That alone is power, quiet power. The kind that does not need noise to confirm itself. The kind that walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere without performance. The kind that unsettles manipulative people because they can feel that your pain has educated you. You are no longer easy to deceive with flattery. You are no longer easy to control with guilt. You are no longer easy to bait with drama. The battle made you dangerous because it took your innocence and matured it into discernment, but it did not take your heart. It took your softness and turned it into steadiness, but it did not turn you bitter. It took your sensitivity and forged it into spiritual sight. This is why some people feel uneasy around you now without being able to explain why. They remember a version of you that bled, openly trusted, quickly waited too long and questioned your own worth in silence. They expected your pain to keep you small. They expected your suffering to make you retreat forever. They expected your wounds to remain open enough for them to keep touching them, but they miscalculated. The same tears they mistook for fragility became the sharpening stone of your spirit. The same suffering they assumed would silence you became the forge where your authority was formed. And that is why those who watched you in broken seasons often celebrated far too early, because they did not understand what they were seeing. They thought the exhaustion meant the end. They thought the emotional weight meant you were finally finished. They thought the silence meant defeat. They thought the tears meant surrender. From the outside, it may have looked like you were losing ground. It may have looked like life had cornered you. It may have looked like the chosen one had finally run out of strength. But appearances are often poor interpreters of spiritual process. What people call ending is often incubation. What people call weakness is often transition. What people call defeat is often the hidden stage before emergence. Your enemies, your doubters, your quiet observers, even those who once loved you but lost faith in your rising. Many of them celebrated too soon because they were looking at your pain with shallow eyes. They saw the wilted field, but they did not know seeds were under the soil. They saw the tears, but they did not understand that tears water more than faces. Tears water destiny. Tears soften the earth where the next version of you is trying to break through. In seasons where you felt humiliated by your own vulnerability, heaven was not writing your obituary. Heaven was preparing your next unveiling. You were not dying in those moments. You were becoming less attached to external validation, becoming less available for confusion, becoming more rooted in truth, becoming more serious about the stewardship of your own life. That is why what looked like inactivity was often gestation. Your spirit was growing in hidden chambers. Your identity was consolidating. Your voice was gathering depth. Your boundaries were forming bones. Your peace was learning to survive without permission from anyone else. And because this process happens invisibly, people often mistake it for ruin. They celebrate because they think they have seen the final chapter when they have only witnessed the dark soil before germination. But the chosen one's story has always carried this pattern. The wound comes first, then the wisdom. The crushing comes first, then the oil. The burial comes first, then the rising. So let them think they saw your ending. Let them misread the sacred pause. Let them remember the version of you that could barely speak through tears. Because when growth finishes its hidden work, you do not need to argue with their misunderstanding. Your life becomes the correction. Your stability becomes the correction. Your clarity becomes the correction. Your unexpected peace becomes the correction. And beneath all of this, deeper than people's opinions, deeper than the visible process, deeper even than your own interpretation. At times there has been a greater hand involved all along, because none of your tears fell unseen. None of your pain evaporated into meaninglessness. None of your grief was wasted in the economy of God. Every tear was witnessed, counted, and held in divine memory. God was not absent in the nights you questioned everything. He was not missing when you felt overlooked, discarded, or emotionally shattered. The silence was not abandonment. The delay was not indifference. The suffering was not proof that heaven had turned away. Sometimes God works with such depth that the surface of your life cannot immediately explain what He is doing. He allows certain things to break not because He delights in your pain, but because He is after a version of your heart that can carry more truth, more maturity, more anointing, more responsibility. Every painful moment was being used. Every betrayal exposed something. Every disappointment purified something. Every lonely night deepened something. This is one of the hardest truths for the chosen one to accept, because when you are inside grief, you often want explanation more than transformation. You want answers more than process. You want relief more than refinement. But God, in His deeper wisdom, often uses the very seasons you would have escaped to build the exact character your calling requires. He was shaping patience where panic used to live. He was shaping humility where self-protection used to dominate. He was shaping obedience where self-will used to rush ahead. He was shaping compassion in the places where pain could have easily turned to coldness. And because He sees farther than you do, He was also arranging timing. Divine timing is not merely about when something arrives. It is about who you are when it does. Had certain doors opened sooner, you might have entered them with unhealed wounds, misplaced trust, or a hunger for validation that would have turned blessing into burden. So God let the tears do their work. He let the waiting do its work. He let the hidden seasons do their work. Not to punish you, but to prepare you. The chosen one must understand this with holy seriousness. Your pain was never random material thrown into the air. It was gathered into purpose, it was folded into formation, it was woven into assignment. God collected every tear not as a passive observer, but as an active architect, measuring what needed to be healed, what needed to be emptied, what needed to be strengthened, what needed to be revealed. That is why even when the season made no sense, it still carried sacred intelligence. There was order inside the ache, there was design inside the delay, there was meaning inside the mystery, and when that truth settles into your spirit, you realize you are no longer standing in the same emotional territory you once occupied, because the season of weeping did not end in permanent sorrow. It gave birth to warfare, not the warfare of chaos, rage, and reckless reaction, but the warfare of spiritual maturity, the warfare of someone who has learned how to stand, the warfare of someone who no longer bleeds in the same way from the same places. You are not in the same emotional state you used to be in. You still feel deeply, but now feeling is partnered with wisdom. You still care, but now caring is guarded by discernment. You still know sorrow, but now sorrow no longer has unrestricted access to your identity. The crying season produced more than relief. It produced a warrior spirit. It taught you how to carry emotional intelligence, how to read your own inner weather without being ruled by it, how to separate fear from intuition, how to identify manipulation, how to recognize when your peace is being negotiated away. That is warfare. You do not enter the next level merely by feeling stronger. You enter it by becoming more internally governed. The old you wept and wondered if the story was over. The emerging you may still weep, but now you know tears are not prophecy of defeat. They are often part of preparation. They are often evidence that something important is moving. You now understand your purpose with greater depth because suffering clarified what pleasure once blurred. You know what matters, you know what drains you, you know what is worth fighting for and what is not worth your energy. You know that not every battle deserves your presence and not every open door deserves your yes. That is spiritual authority. Authority is not loudness. And it is the ability to remain rooted in truth when pressure invites distortion. It is the ability to walk forward without needing every shadow explained first. It is the ability to hear the deeper instructions beneath your emotions. The crying season brought you to the edge of yourself, and at that edge you discovered that a warrior was being born, not the kind that performs invincibility, but the kind that has already met weakness and learned how not to bow to it. And that is why your tears were never the end of the story. They were the beginning of your rise. They were the river that carried you out of old versions of yourself. They were the baptism of your becoming. They marked the place where fragility stopped being your identity and started becoming your teacher. And now, as the journey reaches its fiercest and most luminous meaning, you can finally see that your greatest strength came from the very places that once hurt the most. What was meant to destroy you became the source of your authority. What was meant to shame you became the evidence of your depth. What was meant to exhaust you became the training field for your endurance. This is the holy reversal that marks the chosen one's life. The wound becomes wisdom. The sorrow becomes sight. The rejection becomes redirection. The breakdown becomes rebuilding. The tears become fuel. The survival itself becomes proof. Proof that you were held when you thought you were abandoned. Proof that your spirit carried more capacity than you knew. Proof that you were never ordinary material. Because not everyone can go through what you went through and still come out with tenderness, clarity, and faith intact. Not everyone can lose illusions and still choose truth. Not everyone can be wounded and still become wiser instead of crueler. But you did. That is power. Real power. Not borrowed from image, not manufactured by noise, but grown from the underside of suffering. The things that once made you ask, why is this happening to me now, stand as pillars in the answer to a greater question, what is this forming in me? And the answer is unmistakable now. It formed resilience, it formed discernment, it formed quiet confidence, it formed reverence for your own energy, it formed a deeper bond with God, it formed a warrior spirit capable of carrying love without naivety, truth without aggression, and purpose without apology. This is why your pain became your power. Not because pain is beautiful in itself, but because what God and your own enduring spirit made from it is beautiful, formidable, and real. You're standing now in a strength that could not have been taught to you in theory. It had to be lived. It had to be cried through. It had to be walked through at night with no audience but heaven. So do not be ashamed of the tears in your story. Do not edit them out as if they weaken your testimony. They are part of the fire, they are part of the forge. They are part of the evidence that the chosen one did not become powerful by avoiding pain, but by allowing pain to be transformed. And now the very things that tried to bury you have become the soil from which your authority rises. Your tears became fuel, your wounds became wisdom, your survival became proof that your life carries a greater assignment. And that is why you must never again call yourself weak for having felt deeply. You are becoming powerful in the most honest way possible. You are being prepared for something greater. And now that the fire has met the tears, there is something in you that knows with quiet certainty you did not just survive the storm, you brought something back from it. So let this truth settle into the deepest part of you. Now, if you cried, it does not mean you were weak. It means you carried something heavy enough to make your soul tremble, and yet you still survived it. It means you stood under emotional weight that would have made many people collapse completely. And even when your heart cracked, even when your voice shook, even when your strength seemed to run out in the middle of the night, something inside you refused to die. That is not weakness. That is evidence of a life marked by endurance, a spirit marked by depth, and a calling marked by fire. Chosen one, your tears were never something to be ashamed of. They were sacred. They were the language of a soul under pressure, the release of a heart that refused to become stone, the proof that you were still alive in places where others would have gone numb. Every tear you shed carried power. Every tear revealed love, honesty, sensitivity, and spiritual capacity. And that is why what broke others did not destroy you. It refined you. It stripped away illusion. It burned away false dependence. It exposed what was fragile and strengthened what was eternal. The very things that were meant to crush your spirit became the fire that awakened your authority. The very pain that was supposed to silence you became the force that clarified your voice. The very wounds that looked like endings became openings through which wisdom, discernment, and strength entered your life. You must understand this now with complete certainty. You are not falling apart without purpose. You are being transformed. You are being purified in places nobody could see. You are being prepared for levels of purpose that an untested heart could never carry. And now the fire born from those tears is not random emotion. It is directed strength. It is mature power. It is spiritual clarity. It is the kind of fire that does not burn out quickly because it was born in truth, not ego. It was born in survival, not performance. It was born in the secret place where you had no audience but God and no weapon but your endurance. That is why your victory will carry a different weight. It will not be shallow. It will not be borrowed. It will not be something you stumbled into by accident. It will be the kind of victory that comes from being forged. The kind of victory that carries peace in its eyes and authority in its silence. The kind of victory that makes people look at you and wonder how you became so strong when only heaven knows how many nights you had to cry your way through just to reach the morning. But you did reach it. You're still here. You are still standing. And more than that, you are rising with a depth you did not have before, a vision you did not have before, and a fire you did not have before. So never again insult your journey by calling your tears weakness. They were the river that carried you here. They were the evidence that your heart remained open while life tried to close it. They were the sacred oil of your transformation. And now, chosen one, the time has come to walk like someone who understands what they survived. The time has come to stop shrinking in memory of your pain and start standing in the authority your pain produced. The time has come to recognize that the same tears that once fell in darkness have now become flames lighting your path forward. You're no longer just the person who suffered. You are the person who survived, learned, transformed, and rose. What was meant to crush you ignited you. What was meant to bury you planted. What was meant to end you introduced you to your true power. And now that power is leading you forward into purpose, into strength, into clarity, and into victory that no one can take away because it was born from the holiest proof of all you carried, the weight you wept through the fire and you still became.